Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this fourth and final seminar in the seminar series on Archipelagic Indias that Professor Ananya Kabir from King's College English Department and myself have organized within the main seminar series of the King's India Institute, which we thank, of course, in the person of the director, Louise Tillin, and also Vignesh, who has helped us setting us everything for these seminars. We thank them for their collaboration and their hospitality in the seminar series. I am Luca Raimondi, and I am a postdoc, Marie Research Fellow, working with Professor Ananya Kabir on Archipelagic Indias, loosely defined. We're not here to talk about my project, though. We are here to conclude this first, hopefully first season of the seminar series, which we will hopefully have the opportunity to run again next year or in the years to come. And we do so, I think we are closing today with a very high point, saving the best for last. But actually, this is not to say that we didn't have a good time with all of our previous speakers, whom we also thank. And in fact, I will remind everybody of their splendid seminars that they delivered in the past. Today we have Mahmood Kooria with us, Dr. Mahmood Kooria, who is in the news these days for his just come out monograph, which I'm going to give a few details about as soon as I introduce him. I see that those that registered are joining us slowly, so I'm taking a few minutes to introduce Mahmood and today's seminar. So let me just provide a quick recap of the seminar series, which we were able to run this year. We had 4 seminars, 2 on the Lakshadweep and 2 on the Andaman Islands. In fact, one on the Lakshadweep is today. We did start with, back in November, I believe, with Dr. Shāfiʿī Texts from the University of Dayton, who was talking us about a novel from a Pakistani writer, Uzma Aslam Khan, speaking about the Andaman Islands. And we continued on this thread for the Andaman Islands just at the beginning of this month, when Dr. Arunima Bhattacharya from the University of Leeds also took us through the panorama of literature on the Andaman Islands. She spoke about recent novels from South Asia that do somehow represent or talk about the history of the Andaman Islands. Then back in December last year, we started knowing more of the Lakshadweep with Dr. Bindu Menon from Azim Premji University, who introduced us to the media imaginaries of the islands. And we go back today for the 4th seminar on the Lakshadweep, to the Lakshadweep Islands, with precisely Dr. Mahmood Kooria. His talk today is titled Island Registers, Languages of Transactions in Lakshadweep. So a few notes to introduce Mahmood. Mahmood is a researcher at Leiden University and also a visiting faculty of history at Ashoka University in India. He was previously a postdoctoral researcher at the Dutch Institute in Morocco, in Rabat, and at the International Institute for Asian Studies and the African Studies Center in Leiden. As I was saying before, 2 publications came out this year, a monograph that I believe just came out last week or maybe a couple of weeks ago. It is titled Islamic Law in Circulation, Shāfiʿī Texts Across the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean, published by Cambridge University Press. And another publication came out, a co-edited book with Sanne Ravensbergen published by Routledge, titled Islamic Law in the Indian Ocean, Ideas, Texts, and Practices. So without further ado, but also if I can get to open, okay, good, and see, yes, of course, good. So we will follow the usual format that we have. Mahmood will speak for about 30 minutes. I know he has a PowerPoint also to help us, guide us through his talk. And his talk will be followed by a short response from Professor Ananya Kabir. We will then open up for Q&A. If you have any questions also, while Mahmood is speaking, you can write them in the chat box, or at the end, we can even let you speak. You can raise your hand, or just, again, write your question in the chat box. The seminar will be recorded, and so we hope also that we will be able to engage many more people through the YouTube channel. I see Munir has just joined us. I'm happy that we had some technical glitches at the beginning of the seminar, but I see that people are indeed joining us, and we're just about to start, Munir. And so, yeah, so we are recording the seminar. You can find that online on the YouTube page of the King's Global Affairs School for Global Affairs YouTube channel, and along with also all of the other seminars. So on to you, Mahmood. We have an hour and 10 minutes, and we are all excited to hear you today.
Okay, thank you so much, Luca, for such a wonderful introduction, and also thank you, Ananya, for the invitation, for being part of this event that you and Luca have been organizing. So, just before we started, we were exchanging emails saying that we canceled this event due to the technical glitches, and then just I was about to sign out, I received Luca's email with the link. Yeah, but I'm glad that finally we are doing this. I'm sorry for all the participants that those who couldn't join, or those who had to wait long due to the technical issues. Anyway, we don't have much time, so I'll try to be. I'll directly go to my topic, and remind me, if I go beyond 30 minutes. Lakshadweep has been something very dear to me through my research, and also even before and after that. And therefore, I might end up talking a lot, but still, I would like to stick to certain dimensions that would encourage all of us to think in different ways. So let me, okay. So I think, Luca, you are the host, right? Can you please allow me to share the screen?
Sorry, let me do that. If I know how to do that. Okay, I think.
Oh, yeah. It's perfect. It works now. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. So island registers languages of transactions in Lakshadweep. Although Lakshadweep is not my area of expertise, or my immediate area of research, still I have been working in the islands, or on the islands, for some time for a project about which I'm talking in a minute. But mostly, I'll give a brief historiography of of the literatures that have been written on the islands, and mainly in order to take the gap, or the concern that this presentation has. So I have written briefly about this in an essay again that Ananya and Ari had edited last year. So there are a lot of works on Lakshadweep, even though it's a remote group of islands, about 20 islands, but 11 of them inhabited by people, while others are not. And then since late 19th century, scholars have been writing about, especially in the colonial administrator officers, have been writing about it in different ways, especially Robinson and Ellis. Their works are important for the, for any student of, for anyone who is interested in studying or getting an idea of the islands. And these works continue to be sort of like still entry points for a comprehensive idea of the islands. And following the colonial gazetteer writing methods in the 1977, an Indian scholar Manadia published a gazetteer for Lakshadweep, which is also quite important for those who are interested. But since the 1960s, a lot of anthropologists, especially Leila Dubé, who had conducted, and her students, especially Abdurrahman Kutti and then Itaman, both of them conducted, and three of them in a way, conducted extensive anthropological ethnographic studies. And these works, especially Itaman's work, are sort of like a comprehensive close analysis, like an extensive analysis of some of the dynamics in the islands. And there are also Andrew Fox, who had written like the larger oceanic perspective. And lately, in the last 2 decades, there have been some works, especially one important work by a judge who is also an academic, at least through his research. Vijay Kumar, he published a book, which is based on his dissertation on several legal dimensions in the, and legal disputes, especially with regard to the matrilineal systems in the islands. And Sheena Shukur also did a similar study comparing and connecting the islands and then their legal issues with Kerala. But then what is more interesting is a lot of works, produced by several local scholars, especially like, even though they are not necessarily like academic works as we might understand them today, but still like, they give us some of the internal insights from the islands, especially one of the most important works. There are works before and after this work, this Pukoya, P.I. Pukoya, who published this work, very small work called the Volpatti, or the origin of the island, is an important study that brings together diverse dynamics of the group of the islands. But later, several other scholars from within the region have published many other works, as doctoral dissertations and also popular explorations into history. One, this is what I was mentioning. This sort of short survey of the literature in a series, an online issue that Professor Ananya and Ari Gautier had edited in 2021 last year. So if you're interested more about the details, you can check them out. Okay. But in all this literature, what I find interesting is that almost like a complete disregard to the local sources. Of course, the colonial records or the colonial administrative authors and anthropological works, or even legal scholars, haven't paid much attention to the works produced by the islanders themselves. And like this has been a case despite of a whole lot of works produced on the islands, from colonial to post-colonial, anthropological to legal studies. There's hardly any text that would take the works produced by the people from these islands, including some of the historical studies. Yet there are some exceptions. One is, of course, like this P.I. Pukoya's work that I just mentioned, and then there is another work by Kasmikoya Kanyaranallala, who is also from the island itself. A recent work, even though it's undated, still comparatively, I think it came out 4 or 5 years ago. And then, Dr. M. Mullakoya also have published several works that, took into account the folk songs or traditional stories or many other dimensions within that were in circulation in the islands. So these are mainly the local scholars who have utilized a lot of important literature produced in the islands by the islanders and so forth. And one in English, the only work that I can immediately think of as an exception is this navigational literature, navigational text called Rahmani by Kunyi Malmi of Kavaretti. This Rahmani, this text that Lodiga Varadarajan, who also had written different works on the ships of Lakshadweep. But in this text, particularly published by Manohar in 2014, she brings, publishes and translates parts this navigational literature, a navigational text from the island, and that is possibly one of the, if not the only one of the texts available from the island in English. Okay, so while we have this absence of complete disregard of local sources, what are the materials available for us from the islands? On the basis of my short visits to the different islands, some of the materials that I came across are these. There are several manuscripts written, in a number of different languages. With a lot of different genres and concerns or disciplines, from religious text to ethical navigation. Like I just mentioned the Rahmani, and this text from this image on the right side is also a navigational text, Rahmani. And also there are social texts, various, the performative text, things that you would recite in social gatherings and so forth. One quick example is this text called Futuhat al-Jazair, something very something very well known among the islanders, at least among those who are interested in the history of the islands. This text that describes the origin or the advent of Islam, that also gives back a narrative that goes back to the 7th century and also to the first caliph of Islam, Abu Bakr, and his son or grandson, who supposedly who has arguably introduced Islam to the islands. So manuscripts are one group of sources from the islands, and there are also a lot of inscriptions in the mosques, shrines, tombs, and so forth. Quite a lot of them, which are for any epigraphist, Lakshadweep, and Lakshadweep provides a huge, amount of data, which continue to be unstudied. Yeah. There are also a lot of documents of various sort, especially some of these fatwas, questions and answers by the qadis, of the different islands, and also letters between different people, certificates, especially marriage certificates or certificates or the certificates of possessions of the of certain pieces of land and all sort of different things, so which are also very important. And then the registers. So I'll talk about particular one group of register later in the talk, but basically we have registers of land transactions, marriages, divorces, civil disputes, criminal disputes, and so forth, and legal cases, which are mainly from the Kerala High Court, but also from within the islands, studied partly by this text that I mentioned, Vijay Kumar, but also Sheena Shukran and others. There are, of course, several unwritten sources that several anthropologists and others have looked at, but still, the architecture or other complexes, which are quite diverse and rich in their making, is still unstudied. Some general features on these, sort of broad, some broad remarks on the sources. Yeah, they are truly multilingual, being true to their Indian Ocean character. multilingual, like they use a lot of like whether the manuscripts or documents or inscriptions, they are all written in diverse languages, and it would become more clear when I come to like this specific register. So even then there is this prominence of Arabic and Malayalam, like Arabic mainly as a script and Malayalam also mainly as a language. But then they would use Arabic script in order to write Malayalam. But then also they would use different other scripts. For example, Vattaruthu and Kolaruthu in order to write Malayalam, which are also very interesting for several reasons. And in terms of materials, they use like mostly paper, like many manuscripts, documents, and so forth. But inscriptions are either on stone and wood. And I have come across, although it is very rare, but then at least I have come across 2 manuscripts which are written on the palm leaves. Yeah, or olas. They all are, in terms of the conditions, and most of them, as far as I know, unpreserved and conserved, and then also uncatalogued or unsurveyed for the inscriptions. And this is like, I think in the long run, there should be systematic attempts to catalog, conserve, and survey these materials. The reasons why, okay, so from this general overview, coming to my own research, the reason why I got interested in this question, in the region and in the area was, my current project, which looks into the Islam, matrilineal, and the Indian Ocean, and the intersections or, interactions between these 3 keywords, how Islamic communities were matrilineal, and how and why are they located in and around the Indian Ocean, and to what extent, and especially even though there are a lot of works on, on the, let's say, Islam and matrilineal, still I believe the women's voices within these texts are sort of marginalized, and very rarely we hear or listen them speaking for themselves, especially on the system. So that's what motivated me to the group of islands, Lakshadweep Islands, which is also matrilineal, the whole archipelago. Yeah. So my question is 2 questions. There are several, but at least for now, 2 important questions that encouraged me to explore the place is this: how did oceanic and matrilineal systems contribute to one another, and how can we infer from the sources, which are often discrete or silent, as on the okay, the sentence is somewhat incomplete, but what I wanted to see is how can we infer the voices of women, which are often discrete or silent in the sources. And I study Lakshadweep as together with other places where matrilineal is also important, such as Indonesia, Malaysia, and so forth. Yeah. Okay. And this is part of the project, and then I have been trying to, even though this website is still in its inception stage, I want to bring all the sort of different materials that I collect from all these places together, along with the sort of overview for a larger audience, along with academic studies and academic works in the areas. And this is a website I started some time ago, and I must confess that I haven't managed to update it for some time, but still there are a lot of more works, and this is a work in progress. Where you can find materials, books, articles, dissertations, cases, images, and so forth, on these communities from all over the Indian Ocean world. And here in this image, you can see some of these communities, right, scattered from Indonesia to Malaysia to different parts of India, including here. I don't know whether you can see my cursor, but here, and then also on East African side, where you have these multiple communities of matrilineal Muslims. Okay, so from there, once we zoom into Lakshadweep, the one thing, there are several documents, as I mentioned, and then I want to focus on one group of text, the registers that I mentioned. So these registers that I came across in one island is quite interesting. The minute details and the complexity of languages of even the very selection of language and the script, and then the language, the legal or technical language that they use. All of those are something very interesting and something deserve very clear close attention. So in the remainder of my time, I'll try to sort of touch upon some of the major concerns that the sources themselves. To give you an overview, these are almost 3+1 volumes. So 3 each volume is big, more than an A3. The size is quite big, and each volume or each paper has depending on the kind of content that they enter into, it goes from one case to up to 5 cases within one page. So each case is a story in its own. And the time period that they cover is mainly the first volume, for example, starts at 1884 and then it continues. The remaining volumes up to 56. So the 3+1 is that the fourth volume is sort of a later addition to the original collection of the 3. So they are sort of copied but also changed, because mainly these are some of the cases are land transactions, and the eventual transactions sort of made it required to have more additions. So that is the fourth volume. But then the original text is, or the original register has 3 volumes. It is located in the Amini Island, but then the jurisdiction or the area that it covers is not only Amini Island. It goes to it also people from Kadamat, Kiltan, Chetlat, and eventually Bitra. Also part of the people from these places also came and complained or conducted their cases in the Amini Island. And also by the 19th century, when the register starts to record, it was already under the British government, but it reflects a larger complexity. So I don't know whether you are familiar. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this sort of division within the group of islands. So one was under the British, one was under the Alirajas of Kannanur. One group was under the Alirajas of Kannanur, while both group, the whole archipelago, used to be under the Alirajas of Kannanur, but then Kannur. But by 1784, some of the islanders protested, and then they didn't want to be part of the Alirajas, and then they came under Mysore Sultans, who sort of administered the region for a group of islands ever since. But by the 1792, the British took over this group of islands. But then still, there were a lot of give and take between, in terms of cultural, social, economic interactions, and therefore this is also reflected, in terms of the use of languages and script and so forth in these documents. And after 1947, of course, the islands become part of the post-colonial state. So all these, exchanges or complex changes in the administration have also reflected, in the use of languages and scripts. So Jazari, it's a long debate whether can we identify it as a separate language or not, but I would still say the overall language of the registers is Jazari. Of course, like, then you would ask whether, it's is it in Malayalam or Arabic and so forth. But we see that certain sections are written, like, maybe at least, the beginning parts are written in early Arabic. But eventually, once we move to later parts of the register, Malayalam becomes like a sort of the only language, or English becomes like, if it is early 20th century, or depending on, who are the parties there involved, it also become like, it comes. And in the image, like in that I shown in the margins, you can see Kannada and partly Tamil also being, and it is mainly due to the, managers or, people, overseers, who were in charge of the islands, and then they often, belong to Mangalore, Mangalapuram, or so the Kannadiga or Kannada and Tamil sort of switch in the sort of like, especially in the commentaries or the marginalia that appear in the text. Okay. Contents and concerns. What are the materials discussed in the texts? Transactions of various sort. Transactions of lands, houses, and immovable properties, especially coconut trees. So even though, like, this is something very peculiar to Lakshadweep, I don't know about other places which might have similar practices. Even if the land belonged to one person, the coconut trees in the islands can belong to a different person. And again, in the coconut trees, like not all the coconut trees in one piece of land could belong to one person. It can belong to multiple people or multiple families, multiple persons within the same family. And so for sort of like, for a non-islander, it is often complicated. Whereas for the people who live there or, who manage these properties, it is very clear, like, which tree belongs to which family or which person, and the land itself, like, belong to who and so forth. So even if you sell your land, that doesn't mean that, you can sell, and the selling itself is a sort of different, it's a bit controversial, both historiographically and historically. But still, even if you transact the land, the trees contained in these cannot necessarily be transacted, and therefore, they were often recorded there in the registers. Yeah. And marriages and divorces were also recorded along with, especially in the first part, which is like, within one page it can be like, on the land transaction or tree transaction, but the next case would be on divorce, and then the next one would be on something completely unrelated to that. So it's sort of like, from our contemporary sense of, framework of, registering, keeping registers for different transactions, it may not immediately appear as, sort of coherent, but still it had its own logic, to which I will come back in a while. But also the registers all have some cases, like civil cases, civil disputes, and also criminal cases. So I'll come to some of the disputes in order to demonstrate, like, the kind of cases involved or discussed in the materials. Okay, two interesting cases, if I take it, like, very possibly like simple cases, right? But still, interesting in their own ways. So there is this litigant. So one case from the register, volume number 1, is, the person's full name is given, is Tarawad name, or the matrilineal household name is given, but then I don't give it here in order to make it, yeah, because some of these family members are still there, or some of these families or Tarawads are still there. And the defendants are, these three people, Pukoya, Sayyid Koya, and Bambatibi. Yeah. And the dispute is over the over a rooster or a chicken of the litigant. It has been missing, and he found out that the first two defendants have captured it and cooked it at the third person's house for a adiyandiram. And this adiyandiram, I'll come back to it in a minute. And in this case, or in this litigation, this Ahmad is asking for compensation from the defendants. Okay, before I go to the analysis of this case, I'll show you one more chicken fight, or like a cock fight. This is another litigant called Said Koya, who brought a case against these two people, Koya and his wife Kunyibi and her daughter Cheriyebi. And the case, according to the registrar, is that upon the instructions from Koya, the first defendant, Kunyibi and Cheriyebi have slaughtered, my chicken. And when I encountered Koya about this, he abused me verbally and threatened to kill me and to do heavy nurumbirium. It's an interesting specific idiom that he uses against me. And the litigant also says that he's known for his criminal records and is unhesitant to do anything against anyone. And if any nurumbirium is done against me, my property or descendants, he is responsible. He wants to let the court know. And also, therefore, he requests the respected court to punish Koya as you see fit and to protect him from the misbehaviors. So I'll take a minute to reflect on these two, on these two cases from the first part of the register. So beyond the larger concerns of the property transactions, here we see sort of quotidian moments in which the islanders' social interactions, economic concerns, legal interventions, and everyday notions of rights and duties are sort of on display. In my larger questions or concerns on the matrilineal negotiations with Islam and Sharia, these chickens or chicken thieves or their fights may not contribute much anything directly. Yet, instead of being occupied with my own set of questions, the words and silences within these sources encouraged me to think more thoroughly how a matrilineal society as Lakshadweep operated at a possibly banal everyday moment, which they thought required a juridical intervention. On the one hand, the cases show not necessarily the importance of chickens as valuable property in the islands, where animals and poultry were hard to access, especially in the 19th and early 20th century, when the navigations between the mainland and then the islands were almost difficult during the monsoon seasons, at least for 6 months in a year. But the case also sort of demonstrate their notions of self-esteem against verbal abuse and request for juridical protection for their lives and also compensation for the lost property. The cases do tell us partly about the social structures, rituals, and functions within these communities, within a matrilineal community as well. 3 quick observations. First and foremost, the Tarawad names, the TN, that I have removed here for anonymity, as some of these Tarawads are still, functioning or existent in the islands. All of them are, all these TN or the Tarawad names are identified with women. That certainly tell us about the women's rights over the, household and the immovable properties, and the ways in which the houses themselves were transferred from generation to generation, from woman to woman, from mother to daughter, and so forth. And all the men in the islands made a name for themselves on the basis of these matriarchs, clan matriarchs. The Tarawadu names require an elaborate discussion, especially as the islanders themselves identify the islands as their Tarawadu, certain islands as their Tarawad islands, or the original islands, or the ancestral islands from which all the islanders originated and migrated from. But also, it requires more closer analysis for the subcategories of Tarawadus, where female members moved out and established new Tarawadus, yet identified themselves with their original Tarawadus along with the new ones. And I come back to these complexities maybe later if you are interested, if anyone is interested. But another interesting dimension is the involvement of women in both cases as defendants. You know, the names that I have highlighted here in red, Kunyibi and Cheriyabi in this case, and in the first case, Bambatibi. Right, so the involvement of women in both cases as defendants. On a first look, their roles assert the stereotypical, you know, duties performed daily as household tasks, you know, as cooking, you know, for example, this stolen chicken and so forth, and standing behind the male actors. But on a closer look, we wonder why the chickens, for example, in the first case, were brought into the house of Bambatibi. And that certainly tells us about the central role she must have had in the Ender episode. Likewise, in the second case, you know, the wife Kunyibi and her daughter Cheriyabi are not identified as abusing, you know, or abusive towards the litigant or threatening him in any way. In his Ender description of the events, litigant's accusations are targeted only against the first defendant. Therefore, the occurrence of these two women in the case itself demonstrate how the litigant possibly wanted to make his case stronger by bringing it against a household to which the person married into, rather than the person alone. And in this case, what is interesting is that he is not complaining against, you know, this stolen chicken, even though the dispute started there. His complaint is against, the threat or the verbal abuse that was brought, that were made against him. But yet, you know, he wanted to make these two women part of the, you know, litigation process in order to bring the household into the dispute. In the matrilineal households, we know that men often didn't have a social, economic, or even legal agency, and their agency was often constructed upon the matrilineal households or the clan matriarchs to whom they belonged. Here we can clearly see that how the litigant make use of the woman in the household by, you know, bringing both wife and daughter. And here it is very interesting also to note that the daughter is identified as her daughter, you know, and not their daughter or his daughter, which also interesting, you know, in several ways. But basically, he wants to bring them and the entire household sort of, you know, as parties in the cases. But like, you know, how about, you know, religion? You know, not necessarily this chicken case or cockfight case may not necessarily inform us on anything important. But then two, you know, vocabularies that used. One is the Adiyandiram, and then the other one is Nuriyam Viram. Had certain, you know, quotations, have certain quotations which can be identified with their religious aspects. So to take at least Adiyandiram as a case, it's usually celebrated or performed in commemoration of a dead person. Often, you know, a close member in the family, but it can also be in the memory of a Sufi saint or other figures. And it is like, you know, often accompanied with the recitation of, you know, certain verses from the Quran or certain maulids and so forth. It is not immediately clear from the context of these cases, especially the first one, what sort of Adiyandiram that the defendants conducted using this stolen chicken. But the very occurrence of the term encourages us to think more thoroughly on such rituals conducted with a religious or spiritual connotation in mind or motivation in mind, yet utilizing an arguably stolen chicken. The entangled notions of spirituality and piety are thus sort of, you know, very interesting to reflect on and to think more thoroughly in their doctrinal and customary traditions, that is in terms of, let's say, Sharia, which would help us understand the larger complexities in their doctrinal and customary traditions, that is in terms of Sharia and its compromise or contrast with colonial customs. Yeah, so in a way, like, something that would appear very much like, something simple, it's still like, the concerns in the sources help us to think more thoroughly about the kind of, nuances within the social structures. Okay, so a quick survey of, some of the other cases. A lot of the cases are, especially like, when we talk about a matrilineal society, marriage and divorces are very important. And when I started to read these registers, I thought, okay, there are a lot of interest, like, a lot of entry points or entries on marriages and divorces in the islands, all these group of islands. And I thought, like, okay, each case would be like an interesting story. But then soon I realized that, there is a sort of like, over the time, a legal template of registering marriage and divorce sort of, is formed. And everyone is using that template while they register, cases of marriages and divorces. So they only change name of the groom, of the woman and man and the man and the witnesses and so forth, and the house name. But then therefore it sort of leaves out, the all nuances of the cases and the context. So in a way, it sort of becomes difficult to, to analyze the cases for the larger historical context. Yet, the cases, the increasing number of divorces and remarriages within the households, especially on the basis of the deaths, monsoon seasons, and the off seasons and so forth, sort of interesting for us to analyze. But there are also certain marriage settlements or agreements in which both parties make certain agreements before they marry. But then these are comparatively from the late 20th century, and therefore I would leave it out for later. The marriage settlements or certificates definitely give us strong voices from the woman. But what I'm interested is to still explore, like, from this, like, sort of very formulaic legal language of marriages and divorces, still can we infer some voices for the woman. Yeah, I'll this is something that I'm still concerned. But to conclude quickly, I know that I'm already more than half an hour. So keep concluding remarks. The quick question is why a single register, is used for all kinds of transactions and disputes, from civil cases to criminal cases. The immediate answer is that it is due to the Amin's office. So the person who was in charge, who was like, he was the Amin, or, the overseer or the controller of the entire group of islands. And therefore, whatever the cases came to him, it's almost like, we can read it as a case diary of the person, just that it's not a diary, rather a register of the documents. And the register is interesting for its, use of multiple languages, and also use of particular languages depending on the fluctuations in the predominant legal framework, whether it's like, let's say the English or Arakal Rajas, and even though they were not very much, politically in control or in charge. And as I mentioned about the fourth volume, even like fourth volume sort of emerged out of, the recurrent use of these registers from the by the community. And also, like, you can see that in the image that I showed you, like a lot of commentarial marginalia within the this text. And the marginalia or the commentarial tradition as such is something very sort of close to my own research. Like, at least this book that I came out is mainly about commentaries or legal commentaries. So I won't discuss about it now in the interest of time, but still, like, something very interesting to reflect on. And also they reflect, these register sort of reflect or encourage us to think more thoroughly about, the importance of these registers for a settled vis-a-vis a sedentary community, and then for a community that is often struggles or straddles between different places, between the mainland and the island, and then also between different islands. What does this mean, to have a register kept, across decades and across centuries. Yeah. Now, finally, what I wanted to emphasize is as I mentioned at the beginning, hardly any literature has used any indigenous sources for academic studies, despite of a lot of works, and then we need to use most of them. And also, as I demonstrated, instead of approaching these sources from the questions that I am concerned or we are concerned, if we try to understand their language and their concerns, that would be something more interesting to ponder. Yeah. Okay, I think I'll end here. Yeah. Sorry, I think I went beyond a bit. Yeah.
No, not a problem. Not a problem at all. In fact, it was good that you were able to take all the time, notwithstanding the little technical difficulties that we had at the beginning. I would jump quickly to leave the Ananya, some time for Ananya to respond to your presentation, and then we can also move to Q&A. There were a couple of people that were able to join while you were speaking, so just to tell them, also invite them. I know you were only able to enter the seminar midway, but do feel free to ask your questions if you have them to Mahmood. I'm sure he will be happy to even repeat something if he has said it before you entered, but it's an opportunity for us to feel free and discuss. Ananya, on to you.
Thank you, Luca, and thank you, Mahmood, and apologies again to all our panelists. No, yes, ourselves and our guests who were a bit, confused in the beginning, thanks to the technical issues. But we are here. We heard your marvelous talk. Thank you so much for preparing it with so much of interesting and disparate material to bring it together. No wonder you needed the PowerPoint. I think it would have been very difficult to convey the breadth and richness of the material without us having these visual aids. My responses are going to be a little transverse because, of course, we share a lot of interests, and we know that because whenever we meet, we can't stop talking. We go on for hours discussing all sorts of things, which are our common areas of interest. But obviously, in terms of discipline, in terms of the languages, the methods we use, we are really coming from very different places. And as a result, my comments to you will probably be different than were it a historian of legal Islam or the Indian Ocean or indeed Lakshadweep or the Malabar coast. But I am entranced by the material you presented, because what is the purpose of our seminar? It's to open up the very particular spaces of, say, people like with your specializations are, in fact, you have moved from what you are comfortable with to Lakshadweep. So imagine if for you, Lakshadweep is presenting a different arena. For the rest of us who are coming to these spaces completely as novices, it's really a bit mind-boggling to know what is out there. And this is the purpose of our seminars, to open up these spaces which come under the framework of the Indian, post-colonial Indian nation, but we do not participate in the same way at all as so-called mainstream, territorial, peninsular, elements within what we think is the nation. And I feel that we have, therefore, a pedagogic interest in teaching ourselves more and also opening out these spaces to our audiences and whoever will listen to the YouTube recording after it's posted. And so my comments really are in that spirit. What do I learn, from what you presented to us, and what can that, how can that impact what I do in general? So the first thing is that the sheer multiplicity, you have used the word multiple many times. Even in one slide, you had multiple languages, multiple scripts, multiple materials. The sheer multiplicity of what you were presenting is absolutely, an eye opener, for people who feel that these islands are out there and they are really not of any, they do not enter discourse in any way unless there's some sort of threat to integrity perceived, such as that happened recently last year. Nobody knows, let alone cares about what are the, what's the framework for culture in a place like Lakshadweep. So I think that at the very beginning, it must be noted how valuable it is for us to be given a very clear indication of the variety and multiplicity of sources and evidences that are there for anybody who wants to study Lakshadweep in any way. Of course, this means that certain competences must be gained by such people. And that is also humbling to know that it is not even enough, it seems, to know Malayalam. It's not even, you have to go into several kinds of interrelationships of different languages, including Jazeri, including varieties of Arabic, and so on. So again, we need to, I think the material that you presented almost alerts us to the different kind of respect we have to bring to these island worlds, these archipelagic worlds. And they are not to be seen as simply some outliers, to South Asian studies, to the grandeur of Indian Indology or whatever. They are, I think, spaces where key questions have not only the potential to be formed, but also some of our assumptions, totally overturned and challenged. Here, I think I come to the fact that you have asked a very interesting question. How do, in your own research, which alerts us to these materials, also in your paper, you wanted us to know what you're doing with the materials. So, for example, we know that you are a historian of matrilineal and oceanic Islam. And what you are asking is that actually this material makes you ask, once again, from maybe a slightly different perspective from that which you're using mostly or thus far, how does the oceanic and the matrilineal system, mutually influence each other? How are they kind of mutually connected? And I think this is a very fascinating discussion or question. Why? Because it really shows the value of a place like the Lakshadweep archipelagos to challenge our notions of what is mainstream South Asian culture. We know, even in school, etc., we are kind of told that, in Kerala, there is a matrilineal system. But does anybody even, that's it. It's just a piece of information. It is never really used to make us interrogate. What does it mean to have a thriving matrilineal system that has survived and been intact through the centuries? Clearly, as the legal evidence shows, is mobilized by people, actually, rather than discarded. People are actually using it to make their case, to talk about chickens, whatever, So the whole, the institution of matrilineal is really not a marginal footnote to thinking about when people talk about the patriarchal structures of South Asia, caste systems, this and that. Well, I really think we should pay a little more attention to why and how matrilineal stays, survives, and is mobilized. Now, the point about Lakshadweep seems to me that it takes us even further away from any territorial certainties by moving us squarely to the oceanic realm. And we are forced again to perhaps find that conceptual, but also kind of, a kind of like deeper link between what the ocean teaches us and therefore what also a system such as matrilineal can do. And I know people are talking a lot these days about Indian Ocean and Indian oceanic realms of thought, the ocean as method. Well, this is a very important case of seeing how the ocean as method can interlock with, the study of a system of organizing society that is quite robust, even though it is totally not patriarchy. It's the opposite. And yet it's so what I think shifting the gaze to Lakshadweep does is, and that's where the archipelagic framework comes into being, we start out not by thinking, oh, this is just a little footnote to whatever's going on in the landmass of India and South Asia. It is actually, let us view the entire landmass from this vantage point. And what does that tell us about the rest of other spaces in this landmass, other island societies? How does the ocean and the land interact? So, a place like Lakshadweep and the question you've asked about the interlocking of the oceanic and the matrilineal becomes like a pivot, a pivot for a complete, different kind of an orientation towards our usual questions, of South Asia, and indeed of modernity, I think, because that's the second thing that all the registers show us. The registers belong to jurisprudence and juridical organization of one's life, and they show, I think, a very clear inter-imperial, interaction, how islanders are using the different systems they find themselves interpolated in to, again, just, gain control over their lives on a daily basis. So very big questions about the role of law in one's life and the colonial, the whole colonial edifice that put certain legal systems onto us, even though there were others, like the Sharia system continuing, all these big questions can be beautifully, I think, readdressed through these, the minutiae of these island registers that you have presented us. But as a final note, I think I'm going to say what was for me the most striking about your talk, apart from the big questions and the urgency of these big questions, and the satisfaction of thinking that these big questions can be mounted from small islands. I think what's really important is the life of those, the quotidian life of those small islands that we could guess from between the lines of your talk, from coconut trees, and the complications around ownership of the coconut tree, which to us is complicated, but to them is pretty simple. As you said, they know exactly how much of a coconut tree belongs to whom, I mean, the very, again, the notion of possession, capitalism, ownership, is, thrown, totally into disarray because of this, of just these coconut trees, and how they are treated in the legal registers. From coconut trees to chickens, and various ways in which these chickens are also making, abused by you as a lever to even go beyond Sharia Islam and think about what kinds of anxieties and fears and weapons people have against each other, which belong to well, we go into another register of religious life, and folk life even. So, we had coconut trees, we had chickens, we had mention of different sources of epigraphy, which obviously makes us imagine that this is these are islands rich with the written word inscribed onto different planes of life, be they tombstones to to different kinds of notices for everyday life. The navigational texts, which again remind us that these are island people that need tools to move, just like the Pacific Islanders, are just like people who use dead reckoning. So there's so much of knowledge that these sources convey that point to a very, the uniqueness, and the specificities of life on these islands, which again return us to where you started us from, the need therefore for us to valorize and remember that there are indigenous sources. People on these islands have been talking about themselves and have recorded their own ways of life for themselves. And so really, this is a brave new world that you've invited people to navigate. And I'm so happy that we could manage to do this, bring you in to share your new research, so that we can all see the value of deliberately leaving comfort zones and going to such spaces. And I do know that we have amongst us people like Lakshmi Pradeep who are doing the same, and others too. So I think it would be great to have, I hope, some questions for them in the time that we have remaining. But thank you again. I would just say that one more last thing before we open the floor to them. much of what you were saying was reminding me of when I was doing my PhD and the training we got to read medieval registers, from medieval Europe, the annalist schools, Emmanuel Ladurie, Jacques Le Goff, Carlo Ginzburg. And, this is our moment. I think we should find ways of also reading between the lines of the registers to create from Lakshadweep those micro histories, I think, which can be enjoyed by people as glimpses, into these life worlds of the islands. So hopefully that's what you're going to be doing for us, Mahmood, in good time. Thank you.
I wish I will be able to do that, but at least the importance of, I'm very glad. Thank you so much for this, very insightful comments in order to bring these, different dimensions together, which are otherwise, considered as extremes or, unrelated to one another. But yeah, these are, especially the comment that you made on, for example, the law and the modernity, and even not only the modern law, but also what stands along with it, or before it is the Sharia, and and then instead of coming from that directions, once we try to imagine their everyday life from the sources, whether it's in terms of their properties or the animals around them or the forest around them, that encourages us to think of a different world that possibly, especially, and I think the island registers also sort of registers of the oceanic world. And I didn't think of that way, especially maybe connecting with the medieval European historiography that would possibly encourages for the Indian, encourages to think Indian Ocean historiography in a different way. Yeah. But let's see if there are any questions from the participants.
Yes, there is indeed.
There is
one.
Lakshmi.
Yes, so let me read it to you. Well, first of all, it's always a pleasure to listen to you, Mahmood. This is Lakshmi writing. Thank you for this talk. During my ethnography in Lakshadweep last year, I came across narrations such as the records were lost in the sea and is gone, by which they meant that the papers were literally thrown into the sea after collating them in sacks. I wonder what lessons this practice teaches us about thinking from the sea, as Ananya was pointing out, on methods in history, and about the less available sources from the islands.
Thank you, Rashmi, for this question. It's a very important question. I think, on the one hand, there is often this narrative of, the documents are lost and so forth, right? And in almost all the, and also, so many people from these communities, not only the Lakshadweep Island community, but otherwise also, people sort of often think of, the documents or the history being lost all the time. Whereas if you start exploring within, within their own, things that you don't otherwise consider as a, people may not consider a piece of paper, something that their grandfather wrote as a historical document, right? So for many people, history is something something that is lost, in the sea or in the land or in the past. But then, for students of history, I think all sort of different small pieces of paper still inform us on a number of different aspects. And I think in Lakshadweep, I could find a plethora of sources, of various sort. And this is what I was trying to understand, then trying to bring them together. Still, for example, the inscriptions is something that I want to read in the long run, but I don't have sufficient skills to read all these different scripts in which with which the inscriptions are inscribed. But still, they are everywhere, in almost every island, every shrine or mosque or tomb has this plethora of inscriptions. So it's not lost in the sea, as people often tend to think. But it's sort of like, that narrative encourages us to think about, the ways in which people understand history itself, right? The past itself through particular, frameworks alone. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Lakshmi?
We'll see what Lakshmi says. And by the way, just to remind everybody, you can also speak if you want. We can allow you to talk if you prefer to engage in conversation, or to just give some feedback to Mahmood as regards his own replies to your questions. Let's see.
I see there is Mariam, who is also from Lakshadweep, who also has done research on Matrilini as part of her full dissertation. Mariam?
Great,
Mariam, please feel free to come in and join in. It's wonderful that people took the effort despite the problems, and especially the specialists on Lakshadweep are here, which is great. And I agree with you, Mahmood, that Lakshmi's anecdote, about this, the way people think about the past, or think about records and think about aspects that are lost, I think also tells us quite a lot. I'm sure Lakshmi is the anthropologist, she knows this already, but what people say about these issues is actually kind of has its own truth value and value apart from what is actually the case. I think that's always very fascinating. And here, as you say, there are so many other sources, all these epigraphs and rock stuff, like on tombstones and shrines. So that's going nowhere in a way, at least nobody can throw any of that away. So what does that mean? But really.
And also, I think one interesting dimension, as she mentions in the comments, that there is, for example, particular prescriptions to throw certain documents on the sea or into the water, even in the mainland, right? So that, for example, things which has God's name on it, or the verse, or documents with anything anything sacred, instead of burning them, you sort of throw into the sea or river or into a well. And that is like a practice, and then we can find inferences or references to that, at least, from Kerala in the 16th century onward. And I'm sure, the texts were circulating, and then the notions of, throwing things into the sea remained and continue to remain as a practice, especially if it is a sacred text or sacred material. But yeah, people do throw away, but even then, history sort of survives despite of the materials that are thrown away or destroyed. Yeah.
Also seems to me a very fascinating insight here into people's attitudes, because if I've got you right, Lakshmi, people and Mahmood, as you say, people have actually thrown things into the sea because it's part of, again, a ritual, or how they want to deal with the sacred, So this is also, the community knows what it's doing. But it's also sort of like the same people are saying, or a similar group of people are saying, but they're lost. So if this is the case, if I've got this interesting contradiction coming through, it also shows people, I would interpret it as a literary critic, as people really playing with others' expectations of how you treat something that's important, and then playing that that discrepancy of expectations back to almost, again, pose an innocent, face about your own. I saw a lot of this when I was working in Kashmir. People would run rings around you, and you have to learn to deal with that. And that's agency also. We go in from the outside and we say, oh, what's happening? Oh, the Kashmiri language is totally lost. It's dying. Nobody cares about it. But they're making jokes in Kashmiri to my own face, and which I cannot understand. So how is that? You see what I mean? These tricks that people play on us researchers, whether they're doing it overtly or not, I think also says quite a lot on power and agency, local power in different ways. So that's and the sea in this case is as the ultimate agency, you know, since that's it's an island. So fascinating, I think, glimpse there, thanks to Lakshmi. Everybody, if you don't know, Lakshmi has also produced this interesting sea lexicon, which is on the collaboratory that Anuja Lay and others have done. It's all on the web, so please go and enjoy it there. Hoping that if there's some other, maybe Mariam has a comment or a question. We still have a bit of time, don't we, Mahmood? A few minutes before you have to race off.
Yeah. I can take one question if there is anyone.
There's a question or a comment. Let me see, from Mariam, who is thanking you so much for the talk. And she says that she's also informed by many about the dearth of sources. And she's glad that you were able to collect all these materials and share it with us. As Mahmood says, papers might be a piece of paper that occupies their spaces, which is really limited.
Okay, yeah. No, I totally agree with you, Mariam. It's something that, like, you know, people often make excuses, right? You know, as Ananya beautifully said about Kashmiri language, for example, being lost, but then still using them. It's just that, like, you know, people have these different concepts of history, like, you know, what is a historical document, right? You know, and also I should not say this, but still I would say that often there are these two, like, you know, especially lately, there have been some attempts, especially among the young generation of islanders, to collect documents. And there is a sort of, like, you know, local rivalry that goes, you know, that goes between them. Like, you know, those who collect certain documents would not or do not want to share it with the other group. Yeah, and then, you know, you come as an outsider, and then you are between these two groups. I know, you know, that, like, you know, from both groups, that they have a lot of materials, but then they don't want to possibly share among themselves, but also possibly with others. And in a way, I was very fortunate to have a lot of good friends in the islands who were very, you know, generous to me and share a lot of materials they themselves have collected and inform me and to take me to a lot of, you know, these inscriptions and mosques and so forth, where they have a lot of interesting materials, yeah, collected over time. Yeah. But true, I think it's a work in progress, and that sort of, like, you know, helps us to, you know, go, you know, and negotiate, you know, through various ways between the local politics and, you know, people's own concerns, as, like, you know, the sources themselves eventually have their own concerns, yeah, when revealing these things to them, to us, yeah.
Great. I think we approached the limit for the time limit for today's seminar. Mahmood was very kind to to agree to also be part of this, notwithstanding the technical glitches at the beginning, because he has another meeting to attend. So thank you again, Mahmood, for joining us in the first place and for your patience today. I think also I want to thank everybody who attended today's talk. Please do have a look at, especially for those who joined us midway, at the first part of the talk on YouTube. The recording will be available, I think, probably in a couple of days, next week at the latest. And we hope that there will be a segue to this wonderful first season of these Archipelagic Indias seminars that we hosted this year. Who knows? Time will tell. Ananya, if you want to conclude also with a couple of words, or we can just let everybody go.
Well, I think Mahmood was saying something.
Sorry.
I just wanted to say thank you both so much for, you know, encouraging me to think through, like, you know, this is first time, although I have been thinking a lot about Lakshadweep and, you know, collecting materials on this, but this is first time, you know, trying to gather my thoughts on it and all these materials. So thank you both very much for encouraging me to do that, and also giving me this platform.
Well,
And sorting things out despite of the glitches.
It's okay. It's all's well that ends well, and definitely we are happy, and we are very proud that your first maybe what's the beginning of something interesting on Lakshadweep has been formally debuted to the world on our platform. So we will hopefully all of us who persevered, our guests and stayed, will also remember this moment fondly. Of course, the joys of YouTube recording means that we can circulate it to as many people as we want as soon as it's out there. We thank the King's India Institute for allowing us to curate this mini series. We have learned a lot about places that normally don't get talked about in South Asian studies. So I think we feel proud that we could bring all of us on board. We will keep people informed as to the reprise, I hope, of the series after the summer when we start the new academic year. But in the meanwhile, we have, I think, got 4 fantastic seminars to enjoy on repeat play. And Mahmood, good luck, of course, with Where this Takes You next. And thanks again. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.